We're ready to go, Hank.
Great, thanks. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Valentine's Day edition of our subcommittee work group. I appreciate you all being here this morning, as always. Dr. Locklear and I continue to try to co-chair this group and lead us through to this next section of the Pathways to Excellence plan for the future. So thank you so much for your work on this. Dr. Locklear is having some health issues this morning and can't talk all that well. So I'm going to try to do the best I can to lead us through this. And I know she'll be there for any kind of support and input as we need it. We can go ahead to the next one. We need to approve our agenda for today. It was sent out to you by Dr. Evans, I think last week, along with a little bit of homework to do from our last meeting. We'll go back through the norms and talk about our focus for today and what we're going to do. It may not take us the entire time, which is, I guess, good. Everybody has some found time. We have a slightly different set of expectations of what we as a group are supposed to accomplish during this particular meeting, and we'll go through that in just a moment. We always put the norms out here. This is never a problem for this group or any of the subcommittees I've worked with. I think everybody is very respectful, and everybody's also very open to speaking their opinions and providing amazing perspectives on this work to make sure that we are doing everything to benefit the students and teachers of our North Carolina public and charter schools. Go ahead. Okay, so our work focus, this is the same as what we were given in the beginning, although what we're going to do with this has changed a bit. We started last meeting starting to identify some of the existing assets that were available for professional development for in-service and for pre-service teachers at different levels, and starting to think about a menu of tools that could be used. We also started looking at which ones would be most appropriate for the different levels of licensure as people move through the progression towards licensure level 4 and above, and then a process for approving tools. All of this work that's within these bullets are things that will continue to be important and necessary work as we move forward, although we will not have every piece of this completed by the time that the board starts to think about a pilot program and whether or not they want to do a pilot and whether or not or how they're going to present it to the legislature. But what we're going to look at today is a draft of, I guess, a framework of what the state board could use in terms of talking to the legislature about moving forward with this pilot program. Are there any questions about the work focus before we jump into our actual work today? Okay. Was that appropriate wait time? Yerba. Okay, so the work today, if you'll pull back up if you'll pull up our document, Dr. Evans sent out a link to a Google document with the framework that Chairman Dempsey has sent us to look at. This is a draft of what would go to the State Board of Education as a really broad overview of the work that would occur through this committee and the outline of what would be a part of the complete draft for the pilot process. I know I saw that a couple of people had added comments to this. Our job today is to take a look at what is here, and we can make suggested edits to the language within it, and we can also suggest amendments to this. Again, this is what would go to the state board for consideration around these professional tools. And this was provided to us by Chairman Dempsey, but based upon all of the work that the subcommittees had done up until this point over the last couple of years. I see a white screen, but I don't see the document yet.
You can't?
I just see a blank white screen. I don't know if others can see or not.
Let me try again.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had the white screen as well, Kim.
Oh, that's so bizarre. Nope. Hold on just a second.
Okay. And again, I think as we look at this, a lot of the language is pretty well in place for how we've been thinking about this, even as in our first meeting. I think we're just looking to tweak some of the language or make suggestions if we need to clarify some things. Here we go.
Is that better?
Yep, I can see it now. If we could blow it up, can you make it just a little bigger?
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right, so our task today is to go through each one of these sections and see if we are in agreement that the language looks good and that there aren't any additions. One of the things that we talked about as we were in our co-chairs meeting was that we wanted to keep things as broad as possible so that specifics weren't written into law that later we were going to be tied to that we didn't want to be tied to, or that might go away, or that we decided was not a great idea. So we were trying to keep some of this as broad as possible as we think about it. You can see that there's a note put in here: the professional learning related to PSU's goals is not covered under this section. This is about what learning is required to advance and or maintain the license. It is a good question from Diana Leese, however. On the side, you'll see she added that, and I don't think Diana's with us today, unless she's calling in.
No, I don't see Diana here.
Yeah. She did ask.
She's going to join shortly. Hank, this is Lori. She's going to join shortly. She's running a little behind.
Okay, well maybe we'll leave that for her to talk about when she gets here, so I don't misspeak there. But I think she does bring up a good question about where EPPs fall within this. But why don't we start with this number one? I'm not going to read this to you, but if everybody will just take a moment and read this number one with all of its pieces below, and see if you have any questions or suggestions about or additions that you think we need to make to this particular piece.
Question, is this this is just saying these are the things that we already have in place for professional learning that could be utilized for licensure, or is this a level 1? Is this a level 2 licensure? I'm just trying to understand like what is in that first portion of that outline piece.
Right. This yeah, I think you're right. I think what it's about is what we currently have available right now, and you'll see as we go, further down, like in number 3, it also says other, and we put that there purposefully to make sure that we left it really broad, that other things could be considered potentially in the future, but these are things that we would like to have included if it were to go into law today, because we know we have them.
I wonder if we need to make a decision as to whether or not we need to have a specific competency-based versus CEU credits. Is it the intention that we are allowing both CEUs and like our credits and competency? Because I could see with competency, there's the plus of you can demonstrate it and move on without having to do hours. But I can also see like, and this is not saying that I've heard of anybody doing this or anything like that, but a teacher like going into an online recorded session, hitting play and walking away. Yeah. No, I mean, just putting that out there, are we talking about having both CEUs as in hours and also like it doesn't even have to be micro-credentials, but competency-based currency? What is the currency we want, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and so what we're being presented with, if you look at letter C, number 1, the idea would be to convert from CEUs that are time-based to a competency-based system at this point. That's what this particular draft is suggesting that we do. So it may be that CEUs, that particular term changes eventually as well, but it's definitely to convert it away from just the time-based, because of exactly what you said. I can turn on my computer and let it run, and that's great, to something based on competency, that they actually have to show that they've met a particular set of competencies. Does that help?
Yes, and I do want to ask one more question in relation to the note that is up there at the top. So sure. Are we saying that professional learning that is aligned with the needs of the licensure program that are created by districts would not be counted? Or are we saying there would have to be some sort of format for those to be counted as licensure piece? Because I know that there's a lot of topics that will probably fall under this licensure, like you have to have letters, or we have to have classroom management, or whatever those are. And I can imagine that some of our school districts are advanced enough in some of those areas that they could create their own internal PD. And my question is, what is the ability for our PSUs to be able to create PD that aligns? That's just a question that I've been wondering.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let maybe Dr. Tomberlin talk to this one as well, but I know that the idea was not to shut the door on PSUs offering their own professional development, but rather we were trying to not legislate what that looked like. I think there would have to be an approval process, either at the district or state level, to ensure that it met the quality standards for professional development. But I know we don't want to shut the door on PSUs creating and using their own professional development. Tom, am I correct on what I'm saying there?
Yeah, the way I understand how this would work is we would remain agnostic to the professional learning vehicle. We don't care. I mean, districts could make 1,000, let 1,000 flowers bloom, I guess is the thing. But in the end, it's the demonstration of that skill or competency against an established rubric that gets you the credit. So as long as you're meeting the outcome, we would remain agnostic to how you got there. I mean, so if somebody can, to use your example, if somebody can turn on a professional learning and hit play and walk away and let it run for 4 hours, but then turn around and demonstrate the competency perfectly in the classroom, great, they get the credit. And that gets us out of this. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to micromanage how professional learning is delivered and by whom. So, the question comes up, can EPPs be professional learning providers? Absolutely. I mean, can Mary down the street be a professional learner? Absolutely. The trick is you've got to meet the competencies against the established rubric in order to get the CEUs.
And I love that. And my next question, which I think it's something that we're going to be talking about later. Is it going to be the PSU's responsibility to say they met this competency, or is it going to be some other way of showing mastery of that competency? Like, who is rubber stamping saying, yes, they've met this competency? And is that the advanced teacher roles?
So that I'm unsure of. I think that has to, I think you would recommend in the pilot, how do you establish, the pilot needs to address the issue of how is credit ultimately determined for a professional learning activity. So I could see the district could be responsible for that. I think that's one way to go. I think you get into issues of uniformity and reliability in those outcomes across districts. That's going to be a potential risk if you pilot it that way. You could have a vendor that, here are the established standards and competencies that we're looking for and that we'll give credit for. And then you submit your evidence to the vendor and it's evaluated. You could have something external, which would probably help you in reliability, but it may have some cons in understanding local context. So there's a lot of I think what this team needs to do is recommend to the pilot that in the piloting of this endeavor, we recommend that one of the things we study is how to best award credit for demonstrated competency. At that level, like, not saying it should be this thing or that thing, but studying that and the pros and cons of some different approaches to that.
Right, and I believe, Kim, that's actually one of the suggestions within another section of this, is that we are saying that needs to be studied and a process created for the approval of different professional development tools along the way so that they meet a certain quality level. It feels, this proposal kind of feels, I don't know, a little loose, because part of what's going to happen is that a lot of this work will be done during the pilot as opposed to it all be done up front. And I think they're doing that intentionally, or we're trying to do that intentionally, so that we don't hem ourselves into something that then we have to climb our way out of. We can be more nimble during the pilot to change and grow and make it a better system as we go.
Hey, this is Lori McNulty.
Hey,
From Durham Public Schools. I wanted to build on what Ashley was saying, and it may not be in this section because it isn't necessarily currently existing, but I'm wondering about the place for portfolios, competency-based portfolios. So they may not go through a workshop or necessarily go through a whole micro-credential, but if they can put together a package that proves that they have those competencies, is that on the table?
In my mind, that's on the table under number 7, other. That we don't currently have something that looks like that's been approved by the state or been presented to the state, but that is certainly something that could become one of these professional development resources moving forward. That's
great to hear. I'm especially thinking of our advanced teachers and who are national board certified, and the fewer hoops that we have teachers jump through, I think they would greatly appreciate.
Agreed.
One of the things I'd like to mention too, with regard to what Tom mentioned, that yes, I agree there's going to be some inconsistencies across districts, but that's going to exist no matter what. If you look at that from the other side of that, right, some districts just have access to more opportunities than those other districts do. And so the quality of that, may be considered higher by some, but that rural district may also have a higher need to keep their people as long as possible. And so they may have a lower, that's not something that I would feel ever comfortable about regulating across districts or across the state, because that flexibility has got to be there for those communities. We have to remember, I feel like in this group, that we're the second largest rural population in the country behind Texas. And if we don't keep that in our head, then, we're going to be thinking about perspectives from Wake or Charlotte or, urban centers and not the others.
That's a great point, Mark. Thank you so much, Mark and Lori, for your perspectives there. I really appreciate how Chair Dempsey and his group kind of put this together to make sure that we were leaving it as open as possible so that we didn't, hem ourselves into any particular set of tools. I saw Diana Lease jumped on. Dr. Lease, I know you had a comment in this first section here. Would you mind following up on that and giving us a little bit more so that we can get your question answered there and make any changes? That would be wonderful.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I also noticed my typo in that, and you guys will all learn about me. I'm not the best typist in the world, so I apologize for that, and thank you for reading over it. I guess this one, as I'm listening, it sounds like we are not talking about tools for entry to the profession. And I guess that's part of what I'm wondering, like, who's the target for this? Because when it says that, I'm wondering who that target audience is for these tools. My understanding is that entry to the profession might be in another work group, yet throughout our documents it mentions pre-service teachers. And so I'm wondering what is a pre-service teacher then? How are we kind of defining that? And then because if we're talking about pre-service teachers, an existing asset that I'm not sure I see here would be our approved teacher preparation programs within the state. So that's the reason I wanted just to get some frame on that one about who we're talking about for these, the existing assets.
Yeah, so my understanding is that it would potentially include, this will be a new term. So if we had a person in an EPP program who was a pre-service teacher, who was in the apprentice level, we're talking about tools that would help them move forward. So my thought was that under number 3, in addition to some of these other pieces, coursework is there. But I wonder if it doesn't need to be more specific of coursework provided by an approved EPP to ensure that there's no confusion there.
I think as an EPP representative, I think that might be helpful for seeing what those opportunities are for building upon what exists, leveraging those things into these new spaces that could be developed as part of this pilot. I think also right now there are a lot of tools that could be reviewed as part of this, yet haven't gone through whatever that mechanism is for approval. And so if there's a way to highlight those ones that are approved currently in the state by the state board, that might be helpful. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. No, I think that's good. So Kim, can we add a suggestion in the amendment section that beside number 3, that we would want the coursework to say from an approved EPP?
Yeah, thank you for adding that. This is Lori.
Sure.
This is Allison Schaefer, if I just may interject something.
Sure.
As you all know, I'm the counsel for the state board and DPI, and I'm here to just help you with the legal issues. And there was a comment about the state board not having approved things like portfolios. Because those are not legally permissible as measures of under the statutes. And so if you're going to include a request for things like that to be approved, we would ask that you identify what you would like approved as flexibility in the statutes. And one of them is to study the kinds of things that you guys are talking about now. So it would be helpful to have that clearly identified as something that we need flexibility for in the pilots. That makes sense?
Yes. Allison, does number 7, where we were including other, does that give us enough flexibility to explore some of those things during the pilot, or do we need to specify more directly what we want studied?
For purposes of the legislation, I'm not sure, but you might want to articulate some things specifically that you think need to be studied, and we can take those into account as we go through this process. So I think it would be helpful. If portfolio has been widely discussed in these conversations, that might be helpful to include that as something specific, if you think that's valuable to study.
Okay.
Thank you.
So why don't do you want to add at the end? I think we've got an amendments page that we could suggest to PEPSC that we add an additional area of a professional portfolio.
Hank, I'm just going to change to the Word doc because.
Okay. Great. We'll put it in there.
And hi, this is Lori again. And I apologize, I was not on the last meeting due to a death in the family, so you may have covered this extensively. But under 1B, adult leadership role, does that include instructional coaches, highly trained mentors, or is it more formal like opportunity culture, lead teacher?
Tom, you might have to help me out on this one too. I was thinking it was more of those 4+ license area, the advanced teaching roles that are part of the pilot that would go forward. But it may be left more open to include our current instructional coaches and others as well. Do you know, Tom?
So my sense of this, and this is just how I understand it, is that this advanced teaching role is a way to indicate that these folks are highly effective and are good with working with adults as well as students. So I would assume that in the new model, those kinds of roles that you're describing would be subsumed into that role. Districts may elect to still call them those things, but what we're setting up here is kind of standards for who could be in those roles and what qualifies one to be in those roles. So that's the way I'm thinking about it personally from what I've heard in all these working groups. Dr. Weddington, I had another issue on this. Kim, if we could go back to the section where we're talking about, so it seems to me that in C3, you've got a statement here of regardless of learning vehicle. So right. You're very universal in how you're allowing anyone to approach professional learning, and where you're putting the gate is the demonstration of these skills at standard, and that's going to be measured in some way. But then you go on in 1 through 7, really articulating what those learning vehicles could be. And that just doesn't, I mean, that seems a little odd to me that you're, in the beginning, you're saying, we don't care how you get there. What we care, I mean, so portfolio, let's take that one and all the discussion, and what Ms. Schaefer said about portfolio. So we wouldn't be using portfolio as the thing. Portfolio would be the submission of the evidence to show the demonstration. And then whoever is approving that is saying this is sufficient documentation that this person has the skill. So it wouldn't be the portfolio that's being approved. It's the portfolio as meeting the demonstrated competencies of the skills. And so it almost seems to me like you don't need 1 through 7, that you're taking the position that we are completely agnostic to the learning vehicle. It could be your advanced teacher that teaches you how to do these skills. And we're totally agnostic to that. All we want to know is in the end, you can demonstrate those competencies at standard, and whoever's doing the approval says that that meets the criteria.
I have a wonder about that. I wonder if and I don't know what the parameters are for writing this up for requested funding from legislation, but what if we requested a coach role for every school, or so there's research that shows that you need a coach embedded inside the school, but then there's also research that you need higher numbers of coaches according to the number of students you have in said school. So my wonder is, what if we put in there a request as part of this pilot, if that's what we're doing, that we are funding from the state level instead of the local level coaches, whether it be a ed tech coach, whether it be an instructional coach, whatever that coach is, and those coaches are utilized to support this model of awarding these credits. I just feel like a lot of these things, we're putting a lot of very broad things out there, but we're also not giving PSUs hands to do this work. And it's so much easier to award someone 4 hours of credit by watching a video or not watching a video than it is for them to award something where people are checking on things on the back end. Because we've done MicroCredentials as an example. We've done that with various PSUs, and their problem is having people because we do digital learning grants, and they've earned this grant, had money for a year or 2, 3 in some instances, and as soon as that funding goes away, they can't make it happen anymore because they don't have people to provide the feedback or to approve those credentials. So my wonder is, can we say every school needs a human being who is a coach to support these things, so there are hands to actually do the rubber stamping, or however you want to discuss that. I also think it'll go over a lot better with our teachers and our PSUs to not mandate stuff like this on top of what they're already doing without giving them additional help and funding. And I think it needs to come in the form of support and people, and not just throwing, just random things. So just a wonder.
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think that is one of the hopes for the advanced teaching role for adult learners, that every school hopefully would have an adult learner in that advanced teaching role, and that perhaps this could be part of that role. And I think we ought to add that as part of our addendum, that the advanced teacher role for adult leadership should, at least one should be in every school that will be part of a group to evaluate competency of teachers moving through the licensure progression. Something along those lines. Would that work?
I think so, but whenever you're first implementing this, the problem is going to be you're not really going to have a lot of people in that advanced teaching role. And I mean, we've got some stellar coaches out there. I mean, I was a tech director in a school district with an ed tech coach in every single building. And let me tell you, the support that we were able to offer in professional learning was far above some of the other school districts that I've been in where you didn't have a coach in every building. So I mean, I really, truly would advocate that we say there is funding for this to support this and that coaching piece. Because like somebody mentioned, we have some very rural school districts. And right now, coaches are funded using local funding. And I know those schools don't have coaches at all. And the schools that do have coaches are the ones who have high rates of funding, like Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools. I coached there. There were 3 coaches in the building that I worked at. Dare County Schools has one ed tech coach, and then for some of their schools, they also have an instructional coach. So I've been in other school districts where that is not the case. They don't have a single coach in their building, and it's going to be really hard to ask them to do this because there are people who are wearing 10 or 15 hats, whereas other school districts don't have that because they have the local funding to pay for those coaches, if that makes sense. So
Sure.
I just want to say that I think we just need to make sure that we request funding for coaches from the state level or something like that.
This is Jill Camnitz. I just to throw in there in response to Ashley's wonder, I think that part of the right now, advanced teaching roles are funded on a grant basis, basically. I think the intention here is to get them built into the salary structure and the state allotments, so that there would be the funding automatically every year for a distribution of those positions across the state. Tom, am I right about that? Tom on? What happened to Tom?
My only question about that is that if you're not having them be a entity outside of those student numbers, so if you're saying that, are those advanced teacher roles being decided upon based on ADM, and is that a classroom teacher type situation, or right now are we talking about somebody from a PSU help me out with some of that structuring. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Where you've got so many classroom teachers and then you have to make the decision to pull that teacher out of the classroom to do the coaching, meaning that your classroom sizes go up as opposed to, or it's a juggling act. So if we had a funding source that was specifically, and if that's the way advanced teacher roles are set up, phenomenal.
I think that's the intention, but I think it's also, once again, this is something that in the pilots that can be built. And I don't know if it's our role, it's this committee to do that, but I think that's something that's going to be built into the pilots. Is how can we make that work? What are the needs? How many teachers like that do we need per school, depending on the school size? That's maybe still one of the question marks.
Yeah, I think it definitely is a question mark right now. From what I've heard is how we're going to make that decision. Was it going to be based on the number of teachers in apprentice through licensure, 3 that need to be supported by those adult teacher roles, or whether it's based on ADM? Yeah, I think that's part of this pilot, and I think we should at least include it in our questions at the end, that during the pilot, we need to consider how we provide enough coaches and support for this. Yeah.
So I think to Ashley's point, though, it's got to be state funded. It's got to be across the board. And I think if we do move in that direction, there is going to be some lag time where districts have to be able to train up those people and get them licensed. We know that there are not enough people out there, but if the money's out there, then we'll get the people.
So I do want to let you know that we've already got some coaching cohorts and things going on for professional learning for coaches across the state. And that's being funded through the Digital Learning Initiative. So some of that work's already being done.
So that's a possible pipeline for those positions.
Mm-hmm.
And to add on to what Kim was saying, or Jill was saying, absolutely, intention was to be state funded and state allocated. So the number of teachers that are currently in a school based on ADM would remain the same. And then additional state funded, state allocated adult leadership positions would be added on top of those numbers to support the teachers in their professional practice. And also kind of adding on to what Ashley had said, I wonder if when we're looking at developing the people who would be able to be evaluators, that we ensure that they actually are trained in evaluation so that they understand what the American Evaluation Association standards are. They understand how to effectively be an evaluator that and actually be trained to be an evaluator. And I don't think that all of the adult leadership teachers necessarily would need to have that evaluation skill, but we would probably need to at least make a recommendation that there was a, I don't know if it's like a percentage based on the number of teachers you have in your school, or whether you just need one per school, but that there's someone who has actually been trained as an evaluator, not that we're just like saying to somebody, okay, tag, you're the evaluator this month.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Like, having been part of the MET study, the calibration across all the districts was a critical piece of that. I did want to go back and think about going beyond just ADM. I mean, if you think about some schools that are Title I schools, they are 75% staffed with alt cert teachers. The level of support needed there is drastically different than a non-Title I full of veteran teachers. So just thinking about going beyond numbers of students into school capacity, because that's really how we're going to move the needle, is providing equivalent support, not, or equitable support, I guess, instead of equal.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and just in support of this conversation, the points that Maureen brought up, and also Lori, from a PSU perspective, having the support funded by the state, and also having it being separate from ADM, with maybe, if percentages based on which level of licensure your teachers are on and those kinds of things, I think would be a much fairer way, and also a way to provide the resources where they're most needed. But we do absolutely have to have those separate positions coming from a PSU, and have training provided consistently in order for this to work across the state. So just wanted to chime in with that support.
Yeah, I would like to add too. I completely agree with everything that's been said here. Fully back this. I wanted to come back briefly to Tom's point too. He was talking about C3 and regardless of the learning vehicle, and then we listed all of these things. If you are that person in that role that needs to decide these things, if you're in one district, you're probably going to be looking over your shoulder at the districts around you and seeing how they're doing it anyway. And so the point being that person needs to have a list of resources available to them and an understanding of what these opportunities are to be able to certify. So I do feel like we have to have something, at least a resource, like you have a resource link, right? We could maybe look at it from that perspective. But, if we just say regardless of learning vehicle, and maybe we just need to rephrase that completely, then districts are going to be looking at each other saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? And that could be a good thing, but maybe not the easiest way to start this program out.
Great, lots of great points. I'm going to read back what I just wrote down as I was trying to take notes furiously. And Maureen, can you drop in the chat the training program you were talking about for evaluators, so I don't lose that?
Yeah, it was the Gates Foundation Measures of Effective Teaching.
Gates Foundation.
And I participated in that when I was with New Teacher Center through Hillsborough Public Schools. So it wasn't a North Carolina initiative.
Perfect.
I love that Lori mentioned that. Thank you, Lori, because those are not small enterprises. Having studied the outcomes of the MET study and wanted to adopt, those measures in our EPPs, the investment in that, and that's the reason my comment was in the chat, is that it can't be one and done at the start of it. You're going to have teachers who move in and out of these roles, and so that training is going to have to be ongoing and be able to ensure the outcomes we want to find. And I know everyone at the department knows that, but being able to say that out loud and capture it in this space, I think, is important.
Great, thank you so much. So tell me if this captures what we're saying, is that we want to ensure that the advanced teacher roles that are being proposed as part of the Pathways plan are state-funded roles that are continuously funded ad infinitum, and that part of this teacher role would be as an evaluator of competencies as teachers in the district or in their school move through the different licensure levels, that those folks would have to be trained using something like the Gates Foundation's measures, and that as a new person moves into one of those roles, there would have to be money there for that continued training and professional development of those particular people who are fulfilling those roles. And that the funding for these roles and the number in a district would not only be based on ADM, but on the number of teachers who are in those early levels of licensure who need mentoring support, the school capacity and need of particular schools, and ensuring that the support is equitable based on all of those measures and not just one of them. Am I capturing everything that we need to? I'll write it better. I just want
to say that there's another group focusing on advanced teaching roles. And so that type of verbiage right there, Dr. Weddington, you could write and we can send to them for their meeting this afternoon.
Sure, that would be great. Yeah, I'll put that down and we can get that over to them. Like with all the subcommittees, there's so much crossover, and it's great that we see that this is such a need if we're going to do the things we're saying we're going to do in our area. So thank you for all of that feedback.
Can I add, just to make sure for clarity purposes, that
Sure.
that funding, and I don't know if you captured it exactly. That the only thing I'm thinking of is I don't want to be down a teacher because they're an advanced teaching role. I don't know how to, word that it's not, this teacher is not, this position is a support position for the classroom teachers, if that's a better way to put that. Like you said, you're going to massage the wording, but I just wanted to make sure that clarity was there, that it's not going to pull from those classroom sets and make those classes raise in number of students.
Great. Yep, I'm writing that down right now. Excellent. Thank you. I do want to come back to, because we're going to run into the same issue under number 2. So number 1 is more about progression through the licensure levels and what we would think of as CEUs. Number 2 is how people can be exposed to the knowledge base of teaching as they try to gain and enter at different licensure levels. Tom brought up the point that we say, regardless of vehicle, it doesn't really matter as long as you meet the competencies, and then we listed out some. My understanding is that we came up with that list of 7 that included the other at the end to document that there were some that we already felt were approved by the state and effective, and that we were open to others. I didn't know if anybody had any opinion on whether or not that needs to be, we need to suggest that goes away and just leave it open to anything that is developed that meets the competencies. Because I see what Tom is saying in terms of kind of that we're saying anything goes, but then we're saying no, here are the ones that go right now.
Yeah, that's why my comment was with regard to that, about making sure that districts at least see what an approved list that we've already kind of utilized, that we know is a solid thing, is having that accessible to them so that they're not having to create it from scratch. They shouldn't have to invent the wheel in every district.
Gotcha. Okay, so we're okay with leaving that in there. I might just mention to PEPSC when we come back together that it was at least the language within it might be a bit confusing to say that regardless of vehicle, that we might want to tweak that language to make a little bit more sense there so it doesn't contradict itself. So thank you for that. I guess we didn't go through number 2. If you'll pull back up just a little bit, if you want to read that and see if there's anything in there that draws anybody's attention or that we need to make any comments on. I know that we said somewhere that, I don't know if it was Diana's comment, maybe that was somewhere else, about micro-credentials. We wanted that had been approved by the state, that there was some kind of approval attached to that as opposed to just micro-credentials, period. Is that right, Diana? Am I?
I added that in the Google Doc, and I apologize. I'm flipping between the Google Doc that was shared and Kim's Word Doc. Yes, I asked about that. I think just what are the quality indicators for entry into this space? I would think the same for the NICs, which come out of Carnegie's work. I mean, how are we ensuring that they're built in those ways that uphold those I guess tenets that make them successful, that we would want to replicate them in other places. So I think that kind of quality marker for entry into this space is something that I'd like us to consider.
Could we cover all of that by in the language for number 2, say something like articulation of a menu of potential tools which are approved or which have undergone a state approval process, and then move on so that it captures that there's some kind of approval process for all of this as it changes or vetted. Yep. Articulation of a menu of potential tools vetted through a state approval process that provide flexible access to the knowledge base.
Do you want me to add that below as a blanket statement?
Sure. We could start with that, but I'm asking also if that covers what we're trying to say right now. And again, we're not going to know what that process looks like, but that'll be part of the pilot, is that they should work on what that process looks like.
That was going to be my question, because who at DPI is going to vet that? Not that there shouldn't be an entity. Like, for instance, there is supposed to be a professional development department that is being created, but there was no funding around that. So while I think that it could live in that place, there's no funding to make that department happen. So just concerns of, I mean, I'm sure I speak for Tom when I say Tom doesn't want to vet every one of those by himself. Do you, Tom?
Dr. Tomberlin had to go to a different meeting.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm still here.
I'm sorry.
My desires are immaterial. I think that what has to happen will have to happen. I think when I think about this, I think of a vendor. Potentially, but there would have to be somebody that is evaluating these submissions. And
I truly hesitate on a vendor, because I've experienced with vendors that we've utilized for statewide initiatives before, and once they're in, it's really hard to shift to a new vendor if you need a different vendor or something like that. I think that we need to, if at all possible, be putting that. It's almost going to cost you more to do a vendor, and then you're beholden to what the vendor can and can't do. I don't like the idea of utilizing a vendor.
So, and I think that is a perfectly fine recommendation for this group to explore possibilities for the evaluation of these competencies. I think we need to just. My recommendation would be this group clearly articulate that the pilot should look at how these competencies are evaluated in different methods of evaluation, and which seems to produce the best outcomes. I don't know that there's a point of us arguing the pros and cons in this meeting, because the pros and cons will be established through a pilot process, I think, and we'll be able to make better decisions once we have data to support the different avenues.
I think, if I may, this is Diana, just thinking about the way we have an approval process for EPPs in the state. It's a pretty laborious process that's run into some hiccups in the last, say, 18 months in terms of being on the right side of policy and all of that. So I think this is going to be something that really needs some attention. And I appreciate Ashley's comments about that, because it's going to be entry into whatever this marketplace is, whether that's a vendor or somebody else. We do have a lot of institutions in the state that are funded to prepare this and do this work, so I hope that they'll be a part of that. But then it's the ongoing piece. It's, once you get in, if your quality of your outcomes begins to drop and there's no continuous review cycle, then that would be problematic for those vendors. You get the contract, you're here for 5 years. Does your quality go down as you get to year 4, and then you're like, I'm out? I think that would be a disservice to the teachers and students in North Carolina.
I also wonder, as if part of the pilot programs, if this is something we can look at, trying different ways of the evaluation, and then comparing the ways that those different evaluation programs were, or the way the different, like whether it's a vendor or a state entity or another entity within North Carolina that's already doing this work, compare the quality coming back as part of the pilot programs, and then determine which way would be the best path forward for statewide implementation.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And I think that was the spirit or the intention that we would try some of this, because we do already have, between Keenan Fellows, the stuff that's happened at the Friday Institute, we've done a lot of things out there that already have some screening quality control devices that we might be able to pull from. So yeah, absolutely. Try to write that up the right way.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. As one of the directors of the Keenan Fellows program, it's pretty simple process for us to, and we would be totally willing to do this, to go through a sort of like fill out a document that to allow, that does most of the work for you, where we're sharing maybe recommendations from districts, we kind of provide sort of the credibility of our programming and put it into a document, so that when it gets to DPI or wherever, they can just, they see the work that's been done, and it's an easier ask. I honestly don't know how much of that would be necessary. I don't even know if it would require a full-time position to be able to approve. I don't know if you get, and maybe this is something somebody else can kind of help me with, but do you really think there's enough of these things coming in on a daily basis that people would take up a full-time job to have to approve? I kind of feel like it might be a couple a day, that you look at, and there aren't that many of us in North Carolina, to be honest.
But we've left the door wide open, and we've said that PSUs could have stuff that they've created. We've had, so I think especially in the onset, we might get a lot more than we think we will. And whether or not a position is created, that's neither here nor there. I mean, like Tom said, we at DPI will, jump through the hoops that need to be jumped through and do the things that need to get done to make sure that this is done with fidelity. But I mean, at least for a matter of, if we're leaving it wide open, then there's more coming. Does that make sense? Than just from EPPs and from the from your institute and from other places. I think that we've got 300 and something 300 and something PSUs, and everybody could say, well, I already have this created. Can I get this submitted? And then the matter of, if they take something, because I'm thinking about the people that I know already have MicroCredentials created. And again, just out of that vein right there, they might submit something. Then you've got to sit down and give them solid feedback as to why that's not meeting the microcredential requirements. And then they're going to redo and resubmit. And you might have to work with them one-on-one. It's a possibility. I just want to put that out there.
I guess it's a question of how strict do we want to be with that if we're talking about all the flexibility that we're providing for these districts right now, and then actually requiring like a very strict set of, whatever, then that kind of goes against what we just said we were doing. I do think that it's one of those things where you could put it on the organization to do the legwork for you, and then make the process as easy as possible. In my mind, if it's coming from the school district, I'm probably going to approve that. If they felt like this is what they needed, then they're probably going to get approved. So I don't know what we would need. And I agree with Maureen. I think we could use the pilot. I think it was Maureen that said, that we could use the pilot to determine how long that would take.
I agree.
So I just wanted to ask about what we wanted to add to the addendum piece.
So I've got a couple written down that is all scratched over this piece of paper. Would it be possible, is everyone okay if I write this up and send it back out to the group right after our meeting, just to make sure I've captured it correctly, and you can add any additions or edits to that? That might be easier than me trying to tell Kim what to write right now. Is that okay, Kim?
That's fine. I just want everyone to know that I will be sharing this with Dr. Dempsey later this afternoon. So I wanted to try to get as final a copy as possible, and also to just make everyone aware that Dr. Weddington and Dr. Locklear are the decision makers, and that you guys are highly appreciated as advising members, but in the end that they'll have the formal recommendation that would go to the full commission on Thursday.
Yeah, so we've really only had two major additions. One being about the in the first and second section that there ought to be those state-funded advanced teacher roles that would also potentially do the evaluation and all that goes along with that, and the funding for it. And then this newest one is basically just adding a caveat to number 2, that any of these tools must be vetted through some process of approval, and that during the pilot, that'll be part of what we're going to ask them to do, is that we need to come up with what that approval process looks like for vetting these new tools.
Hey, this is Connie. I'm sorry, I sound awful, guys. I'm having some issues. But going back to what you said about number 2, are we taking away the other? Going back to number 2? No, I'm sorry. I can scroll up a little bit, Kim? Okay, I'm sorry. I was thinking number 1. I apologize. I wanted to make sure that we were not so rigid in this list here that we took away opportunities that PSUs could provide PD within their districts.
Right. Yeah. No, I think we wanted to keep the other there for sure, to keep it open, but make sure that we have a process for approving any new tools that come on the scene. So yeah, thank you. You want to move down to number 3, Kim? See if there's any questions there. And basically what we're saying there is that we're going to pilot the use of some of these tools at different license levels to determine what tools are appropriate. Any language changes you see need to be made there?
I think it's Diana. We're on number 5, correct?
Number 3.
Number 3. I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Been around.
And I think that's kind of what we were just saying, is that there needs to be some way to determine which tools are appropriate for which licensure level. as they move through. Okay, number 4, again, some of these we know the effectiveness of tools like national board certification, potentially others we won't know. So the pilot would have to have some way to figure out how we decide on the effectiveness of tools to predict or determine competency.
So are we saying that only competency-based things will be mapped here in the pilot process? Like, should I read that to say that the pilot that is established will focus only on competency-based learning, or are there opportunities for things that do not fall into the competency-based CBE kind of realm? I'm not sure if it's exclusive or not. And I guess I would follow up, I would advocate for things that are not just competency-based if there's a space for developing a pilot. I would think that we could perhaps open that up to both.
Give me another word of what you're thinking. If not competency-based, if it does not end in showing that you've met some competency, what's the other term we would use?
I think I would probably opt to go to something that would be about mastering the standards, or in those in-task progressions, wherever the language. I would maybe suggest we use the language that's in the in-task progressions as part of that, as opposed to competency-based learning, because I think the competency-based learning has some different tenets to it. I know that the department is looking at that in P12. We have competency-based in higher ed. I'm just not sure that's what our goal is here. I think we're looking at the effectiveness to show that teachers at whatever stage are meeting the appropriate in-task progression level, whether that be proficiency on that in-task profession level as opposed to the competency-based learning. Now, I think the tricky part in that, Hank, is that if you wanted to approach the in-task learning progressions in a competency-based fashion, there could be a pilot for that. So again, I unfortunately, we might be divided by a common language here. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm trying to get my head around, is how to say what you're saying. Because you could almost make the argument, even if you're going by the in-task standards, that you're still gaining competencies to have positive effects on student outcomes.
It's not always measurable, and maybe it's the student outcome piece that is the piece of this that we need to look at. Because you know what I mean? It may be about the teacher's competency, and ability to grow, but it may not have a visible effect on student outcomes right away during that semester or year.
Could we go from competency-based learning to just professional learning? Various forms of professional learning?
Yeah, that's what came into my head too.
Or professional learning, including competency-based learning, something to broaden it a little bit.
I think it's important that we somehow keep in there the proficiency or the competency-based something, or demonstrated something that make sure that we're honoring that we want this to be, regardless of how you get there. So regardless of which vehicle you use to get to that professional learning, that you're able to demonstrate that you have gained those skills. And I don't know how we necessarily say that. But I think it's important that we somehow keep that spirit in whatever language we come up with.
Are we thinking about like the teacher evaluation instrument, or, because they have goals that are very clearly listed in there that may not require student outcomes?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I could see that. So we could definitely broaden it up. We could say evaluating the pilot process, whether professional learning tools, including competency-based learning, has an has a positive effect on student outcomes of interest. That way we could, yeah.
Are you wanting that under number 4, or do you want that in the addendum?
I think maybe in the addendum there, we could just add that line, but insert the professional learning.
Can you repeat that, Dr. Weddington?
Sure. Okay. I need to pull it up on my sheet here.
Okay.
Sorry. Number 4, evaluate in the pilot process whether professional learning, including competency-based learning, has a positive effect on student outcomes of interest.
Positive outcome on student.
Says a positive effect on student outcomes of interest.
Student outcome of, I'm sorry, I missed that last word.
Okay, of interest. Student outcomes of interest, yeah. And I would italicize professional learning as the new thing that we're asking for insert, just to broaden it out. Does that do enough, Diana, to give us some flex there?
Yeah, I like that, because another thing to think about here in competency-based is often kind of synonymous with Western Governors University in a certain particular way of instructing and having instruction and assessment within programs. Even our Pathways to Practice program that we have UNC and NC State run is a competency-based program. And I wouldn't want people to think that it has to be exactly in that vein, in that framing. So I like this shift to think about professional learning through different modalities, which could include competency-based. I think it's a great way to go. But I think we need to have that space and not have it be limited.
I agree.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I agree. I always think of Western Governors when I hear that word, even though it shouldn't be synonymous with it. Definitely. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I will stand right here and say we've got other competency-based programs in the state. We've got some good models out there.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get back up to number 5, Kim, and see if there's anything else to add on that one. If you'll take a look at that and see if there's anything that you think needs to be added or edited here.
I wonder in part 5, letter B, as part of the pilot process, along with collecting examples of professional learning opportunities, would this also be a place for us to, for those pilot PSUs, collect feedback from the districts about the implementation of the pilot and the standards of competency, right? About their kind of our earlier thoughts about, what would be effective for evaluating the competencies, what supports they need in moving forward. Would that be an appropriate place, or is that the work of another work group?
No, it's a good question, because I think one of the things we said up above was that if we could determine how much time it takes to evaluate these different professional learning experiences and to evaluate how long it takes to decide if a person has met those, it might help inform how many of these advanced teacher roles are needed for a particular district or school. So I think that's important. it may be in the addendum as like a C for number 5. Let's see. I guess as part of the pilot process, the state will collect data from PSUs regarding the time and human resources required to approve and evaluate professional learning. Does that capture it?
I think that's a good start. Yeah.
What was that last part, Dr. Weddington?
Data from PSUs regarding time and resources required for developing, or I'm sorry, required for evaluating evaluating learning tools and teacher competencies. I can wordsmith that a little bit better, but ultimately, yeah, we're trying to figure out how they're going to look at these and decide if they are up to snuff, and then also if their people are actually meeting those competencies. Diane says, who determines if the competencies are met, if not the state or the State Department? It's a good question. I'm a little confused on that too. So provided the standards of competency are met, so that assumes that there's some kind of outside entity. I assume something like a testing measure or an assessment that has nationally been validated and is reliable. Things that already have an external validity and reliability measure that we can just say there's some kind of research-based data that says those competencies are met. Is that right, Tom? I'm a little confused on that line as well.
I think Dr. Tomberlin did have to go to another meeting.
When I was reading that, I was thinking like EdTPA, if we continued using that, Praxis 2, if we continued using that as a particular choice for moving through a particular level, some of the ones that we already know. But
right, so that's in a different working group that worked on the measures.
Right. So the state would only review those ones that didn't have an external validation that we considered appropriate.
If we're following through with the appropriate recommendation that we put somebody in the schools that would be responsible for looking at all of this, then that could also be an entity that could be a part of approving it for that particular district.
Yeah, I think we talked about if we refer back to what we were discussing earlier, if we were able to put a coach or whatever you call that person into each one of the schools, then we could provide training around the evaluation systems that we want them to, those competency evaluations and pieces like that, and they would actually be able to approve.
Because they're approving the tools, not the whether or not people met that standard or not. That could be the district itself or whatever. So I think that would be more than fair.
I like that idea as an internal structure, which I think was part of the name of our working group, right? We're developing structures. That's a good one. What about for a group that's outside? Dr. Tomberlin used the phrase vendor. So what happens for a vendor then that comes in from the outside where we haven't developed that internal capacity to within the PSUs to do that?
So I would think, and Ms. Schaefer could also speak to this. I would think vendors would have to be, if they were being utilized by the state, then the state board would have to approve of those initially.
I was going to say we could just have a resource of approved vendors. I'm thinking of like ISTE certification or something like that, where they are outside entities. They're not EPPs. They're not part of the PSUs or any of that, but that we have that list of approved outside professional development that works.
Yeah, for example, our program has had we've sent in the CEUs for various programs that we are offering and had it approved through DPI, through like Jill Darrow, or, that's where we've worked with, through DPI. So I think that's a very real possibility.
I would just say, this is Allison Schaefer, I would just say we would have to make sure that we followed all of the laws regarding identifying vendors and approving them. I don't know what they are or how the process would look at this point, but there may be some requirements.
Okay. So it looks like that's baked in, that there is already an approval process for any kind of external vendor that the state would use. Okay. Right time resources.
Hey, could we note that here or in the addendum, just so we don't have to rehash that conversation again?
Sure.
I mean, because I think, Ms. Schaefer's, that's the guidance that we need for that, so.
Sure.
And it might come up as our recommendations go on to another level, and then at least you have it in the record.
Yeah, we could put that in the addendum, Kim, that that any professional learning tool from an external vendor or a third-party vendor must be approved through the State Board of Education. I don't know, through their legislative process. Through the process required through legislation, or something that connects it to the General Assembly.
So that would require, I would assume, some sort of a certification process, like a form or something that's filled out that I don't think currently exists. So even though we are approved through DPI, I don't think Eric Davis, the chair of the board, is on our board, but but I don't know if that would count as approval by the State Board of Education.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know. I don't know what that process looks like. I would think, anything that we're bringing in externally for statewide use that's a vendor, a third-party vendor, I would assume there's something out there, and it might be different for something like the Keenan Fellows or the Friday Institute that have more of a historical connection. I would assume some of that would be grandfathered in based on past performance of those groups. But I like the idea that we would at least make sure that somebody is vetting these third-party vendors, because they're all over the place now, and I'm sure they'll swarm to try to get their hands in some of this funding.
Yeah, I want to be clear. We'd be more than happy to go through the process appropriately to be submitted. I would encourage that we have a form that we create that all vendors have to go through to get that approval. We would be all about that.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Anything else on number 5 that we need to tweak or suggest? Kim, can you scroll back up to 5? Just make sure everybody sees it. Thank you.
I think, Diane again, I apologize. I do the accreditation work. So I'm thinking about something goes really great. We want something that's not just going to be approval, but continuation perhaps. Like, what is the timeline for this approval in the pilot? And maybe this is something that because it's a pilot, just tell me that this is a down the road kind of thing. But like, what is the term of the pilot going to be? What would the term of an approval be? Maybe that's something that we determine later. But I think I'm wanting for language in this that doesn't just say we're going to approve it and it goes on ad infinitum and forever, but there's a period at which we're going to make sure that we have that ongoing quality. If you think that'll come in the pilot, I'm happy to wait for that.
I think that's easy to add. I think we just put process of approval and renewal for any tools used in the state. I think we should definitely have that included in there.
This is Allison Schaefer. Pilots are pretty much by definition have a termination date usually on them and reporting requirements to come back to the state board and the legislature. So that's kind of standard for such a program, that it can't be infinite or it's not really a pilot. So.
Right. Thanks, Allison. Yeah, that's great. I think that language is still helpful moving forward. As we get beyond the pilot, that there is some kind of a renewal process within, so that things don't live out there forever. That happens all the time, where you still look at things that have Apple IIe training out there on the teacher training website. I saw one of those. Okay, that's a lot of excellent input. Anything else overall? This is our final chance to kind of tweak this before it goes back to PEPSC on Thursday for approval to go to the state board.
I just want to be careful about the language that we use from the beginning to end, where we talk about the flexibility of districts to be able to do whatever they feel is necessary, and moving that into the specificity of the tools that we would create that would approve all of those things. And so it's hard to, when you're saying one thing, I just want to make sure that we are consistent with our language coming from one piece of that to the next.
Thank you. I will, since we're kind of done at this point, what I'd like to do is adjourn us early, and then I'll sit and write out all of these changes that we've done and send it out to the group ASAP, and just see if there is anything that looks crazy that still needs to be tweaked before Thursday. If you get it to me today, that would be great, just so that Chairman Dempsey could go ahead and take a look at it. But if not, that's okay. We can still kind of play around with it a little bit, but I'll try to get that to you within the next 10 minutes or so, if that works.
And Dr. Weddington, can you CC me on that?
Absolutely.
So if there's any feedback, then I can incorporate that. But if you could please get that to us as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'll send that to Kim like as soon as we get off of here. I've got it all written down. Just got to type it. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. Well, as always, thank you all so much for being a part of this. It's awesome feedback. It's great to work with a team of people like you guys, and I appreciate all that you do. Enjoy the 30 minutes you get back of your life. And we'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you.